I posted for a wife the same way I'd post for a good cook or a steady hand, plain language, no flourish, nailed to the board outside the Calderfield post office on a Tuesday in September. Drummond Ranch, 11 miles east, seeking a capable woman of mature years for a practical arrangement. Widower, no children. Ranch work is real. Respond in writing, box 14. I got 4 replies. 3 I set aside before I'd finished the first paragraph. 1 wanted a courtship. 1 had a handwriting that slanted so hard it looked frightened. And 1 was from a woman in Cheyenne who listed her requirements in a numbered column that ran to 7 items. I am not a numbered column kind of man. The 4th letter was half a page. Neat hand, no curlicues. She said she was 37, widowed 4 years, had kept her late husband's dry goods accounts, and could manage a household budget without assistance. She said she was not afraid of cold weather or early mornings. She said she did not expect romance and would not pretend otherwise, and that if those terms suited him, he could write back. I wrote back. Her name was Nora Cal. I tell you all of this now because I want you to understand what I thought I was doing. I was being practical. I had run Drummond Ranch alone for 8 years since Margaret died, and the place was showing it, not in the fences or the herd, which I kept, but in the house, which I didn't. I needed someone who could manage the domestic side of the operation without requiring me to be something I wasn't anymore. A business arrangement, clean, dignified, useful to us both. That is what I thought I was building. I was wrong about almost everything except the part where she wasn't afraid of early mornings. She stepped off the noon train at Calderfield on the 3rd of October, and the first thing that happened was that she looked the wrong direction. Not nervous, not scanning the platform for me. She was looking east, away from town, toward the open range, and there was something in her face that I couldn't name. Not longing exactly. More like she was taking a measurement. Then she turned and found me before I'd taken 2 steps toward her. "Mr. Drummond," she said, not a question. "Mrs. Cal." I reached for her bag, a battered brown case. She let me take it, which I noted. Some women make a point of carrying their own things when they first arrive somewhere, to show they're capable. Nora Cal already knew she was capable. She didn't need to demonstrate it to me in the first 30 seconds. She was smaller than I'd expected, compact, with a serious face that had a fine weather line at the corners of both eyes. Brown hair, mostly up under a gray hat. The kind of woman who has thought about most things before they happen. She wore a dark wool traveling dress that had been good once and was still decent. Her boots were practical. I had my wagon. We drove the 11 miles mostly in silence, which suited me. She asked 2 questions, what the elevation was and whether the well was hand crank or pump. I answered both. She looked at the land the whole way, that same measuring look, and said nothing else. I showed her the house, which was square and solid and clean in the way that a man keeps a place clean, surfaces wiped, nothing broken, nothing anywhere it didn't have a purpose, but no warmth to it either. She walked through each room once, opening the pantry, looking at the stove, running a hand along the kitchen window ledge. She didn't comment on any of it. The bunkhouse was 100 yards east. I had 7 hands at that time. Gideon Cross, my foreman, who had been with me 6 years, his cousin Amos Riddle, 3 ranch hands named Tully, Carruthers, and a young man everyone called Patch, and 2 brothers, Walt and Denny Spears, who had come on in the spring. Nora ate supper with me that first evening. I had not thought through what to talk about, so I didn't talk much. She ate with attention, like someone assessing a piece of work. When she finished, she said the stock of the beans was getting old and she'd need to order new before winter came on, and what account did I use at Meredith's in town? I told her. She nodded, cleared the plates, and went to bed. I sat at the table a while after and thought, well, this might work. The second week was when she started noticing things I wasn't noticing. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tully had gone to town for supplies and come back light, which he always did on Tuesdays, and I was used to docking the difference and not making a scene about it. Nora had been in the kitchen when Tully brought in the load. She unpacked it herself, and at supper she set a piece of paper next to my plate. "You sent $12 with Tully," she said. "What came back is $11 worth. Every Tuesday it's come up short. I checked the previous receipts in the drawer." I looked at the paper. She'd listed 4 consecutive Tuesday runs, the amount sent, the amount in goods, and the shortfall. Neat columns, pencil, a total at the bottom. "Tully skims," I said. "I know." She looked at me in a way that was not quite judgment but was close. "How much have you let go?" I hadn't added it up. I told her so. "Over 2 years," she said. "It's roughly $43. I didn't say anything. She picked up the paper and went back to the kitchen. I am not going to pretend that didn't sting. It stung because she was right, and because the reason I'd let it go wasn't that I couldn't afford the $43. It was that after 8 years alone, I'd gotten into the habit of deciding which problems were worth the friction. Tully's skimming fell into the category of things I lived with, the way you live with a gate that sticks but still latches. Nora Cal, I was beginning to understand, did not have that category. The next Tuesday I counted the load myself, in front of Tully, and docked his wages the difference. He went red in the face and said something under his breath that I didn't ask him to repeat. After that, he ran straight. But that wasn't the thing that mattered. The thing that mattered was what Nora found in the first week of November. I should tell you about Gideon Cross first, because he matters to what comes next. I hired Gideon 6 years before this story, when he was 32 and already had a reputation as the best working foreman in 3 counties. He was lean and quiet, with a still quality that men respected and horses didn't argue with. He ran the hands well, kept the work moving, and had never in 6 years given me a reason to question him. I trusted him the way you trust a good tool, completely and without thinking much about it. His cousin Amos had come on 2 years in. Amos was not Gideon's quality, slower moving, with a loose friendliness that was easy enough to have around. He handled the feed inventory and the tack room. He was not someone I thought about much. That, it turned out, was the problem. It was a Thursday evening, near the end of October. I'd ridden out early and come back late and was at the barn when I heard Nora's voice, not calling to me, just speaking, in that level tone she used when she was stating a fact. She was talking to Patch, the youngest hand, who'd been with me 3 years and was honest enough. I stopped outside the barn door and listened. I'm not proud of it, but I listened. "The tallies for September," she was saying. "The count in the ledger is 41 head moved to the Laramie buyer. The count I pulled from the receipts Meredith has on file is 38. Silence from Patch. "That's 3 head, she said, "accounted for in the ledger but not in the sale receipts. October shows the same 4 head in the ledger, not in the receipts." More silence. "I'm not asking you to say anything," Nora said, and her voice had gone very quiet. "I'm just telling you what I found. You can think about what you know and what you don't." I heard her steps. She walked back to the house. Patch didn't move for a long time. I went around the other side of the barn and came in through the main door and pretended I'd just arrived. 7 head, over 2 months. At Laramie prices that autumn, that was somewhere near $160. I went to the house and I didn't say anything at supper. Nora didn't either. But after I'd pushed my plate back, she set the ledger on the table between us, open to September, and laid the Meredith's receipts beside it without a word. "You've been through these," I said. "Yes." "How long ago did you start looking?" "3rd week," she said. "I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just trying to understand the operation." I stared at the numbers. 7 head. I thought about Gideon, who had run the sale paperwork. I thought about Amos, who handled inventory. I thought about the fact that the 2 of them were kin, had come on together, and that I had trusted Gideon so thoroughly I'd never checked his arithmetic. "It could be a recording error," I said. Nora looked at me. It could be, she agreed. But a recording error in the same direction, in the same category, over 2 consecutive months, is not very likely. I knew that. I said it anyway because sometimes a man needs to say the thing that isn't true before he can accept the thing that is. I need to think, I said. All right, she stood and cleared the table. I sat there for an hour after the lamp went down in her room. $43 from Tully. I'd let that go 2 years. Now this. I thought about the kind of man who lets things go until a woman he'd known for 3 weeks could sit down with his ledger and find what he'd missed. It was not a comfortable hour. I'll tell you what happened with the hands, and then I'll tell you the part that isn't about the hands. I didn't move fast. Fast movement on a thing like this can blow apart before it lands. I spent 2 weeks watching Gideon's paperwork, cross-checking receipts myself, writing to Laramie on a thin pretense to talk to the buyer there. His records showed 38 head for September, not 41. The missing 3 had moved through a separate contact, a man named Fowler who ran a buyer's operation out of a dry goods shed 12 miles west of Laramie. The full tally came to 11 head over 4 months. Not Gideon alone, Amos had been running the inventory side, creating the phantom entries. It was a clean enough scheme if you never looked too close. Inflate the tally on paper, sell the extra head privately, split the take. The kind of scheme that works as long as the man on the ranch is trusting his foreman so completely he has stopped reading his own books. I confronted Gideon on a cold Wednesday morning with the sheriff from Calderfield and everything laid on the table. Gideon went white and then still, and then said nothing useful. Amos tried to argue. The sheriff let Amos argue until he'd said enough to confirm everything twice over, and then we were done. I let Gideon go without charges, on the condition he left the county. Amos went with the sheriff. Tully had already cleaned up his act and was clean of the main scheme. He stayed. Patch, who had known something was wrong and had said nothing until Nora gave him the opening, I kept also. He was young and scared, not corrupt, and he worked hard the rest of that winter to square himself with me. After it was done, I drove back to the ranch in the cold and sat in the wagon in the yard for a while. 11 head. 4 months. My best man, my most trusted hand, and I had not seen it because I had not been looking. She had been on the ranch for 6 weeks. I found her in the kitchen when I came in, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, watching the last of the light. She didn't turn when I came in. "Done," she said. "Done." She poured a second cup and set it on the table. I hung my coat and sat down. We didn't talk for a while. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind had picked up across the range, the first real cold of November coming in off the mountains. "I want to ask you something," I said finally. "All right. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" She thought about it, not dodging thinking. "Because I wasn't certain," she said. "And because if I'd come to you in the 3rd week with a suspicion and numbers you hadn't looked at yourself, you might have decided I was a woman who makes trouble. I needed you to be ready to hear it." I looked at her. "That's a calculation." "Yes," she said simply. "You sized me up in 3 weeks." "I size things up quickly," she said. "It's how I'm built." She wasn't apologizing for it, wasn't performing modesty about it either. She was just stating what was true, the way she'd stated the shortfall in Tully's supply runs. I drank my coffee. The wind hit the north wall and the house settled around it the way it always did, solid. Margaret had insisted on thick walls and she'd been right. "That's a quality worth having," I said, "in a partner." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Is that what this is?" "I think it might be." She looked at the table, not flustered, thinking again. "You said practical arrangement." "I did. That's what I agreed to." "I know," I said. "I'm not changing the terms without your say. I'm asking what you think the terms are now." She looked up at me then straight, the way she'd looked at me on the depot platform. taking my measure. I think, she said slowly, that a practical arrangement is most practical when both people want to be in it. Yes, I said. And I think, she went on, that I didn't come here expecting anything beyond a sensible life, but you've been fair. You listened. You didn't dismiss what I brought you. You were right. I know, she said, and there was the faintest thing in that, not quite a smile, just a softening. But men who are right don't always listen to someone who's righter. I almost smiled. It was the first time in a long time I'd almost smiled at a table with another person. Stay, I said, not as an arrangement, as a choice. She looked at the stove. She looked at the window, where the dark had come down full now over the range. She looked at me. I'll stay, she said. That was November. There is more I could tell you about that winter, the weeks of work it took to rebuild the foreman position, bringing in a man named Earl Voss from 2 ranches east who I'd known for years and whose character I could vouch for, the slow business of putting the books right, the way the ranch felt different without the rot in it, leaner and quieter and truer. I could tell you about the December blizzard that took out the east fence line, and the 3 days Nora, and I spent at the table working the numbers to decide whether to rebuild or reroute. I could tell you about learning slowly, that she slept lighter than I did and was up before dawn most mornings, that she made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, that she had a low laugh she almost never used but when she did it changed the room. I'll spare you most of it. A man doesn't need to put every good thing into words. What I'll tell you is this. We were married at the Calderfield Church on a Saturday in February, in front of Tully and Patch and Earl Voss and the minister, with the ground frozen solid outside and the stove inside cranked up until the windows were sweating. There were 6 people in the room. Nobody made a speech. After, we drove back out to the ranch in the wagon with the heater brick at our feet, and the range white all the way to the mountains. Nora had her hands folded in her lap. I had my eyes on the road. Eli, she said after a while. Nora, I want you to know, she said, that I made this choice with my whole mind. I looked at her then. She was looking straight ahead, but there was something in her jaw that I knew by then, the way she said it when something mattered to her, and she was going to say it plain rather than soften it. I know that, I said. Good, she said, then we understand each other. We do, I said. We drove the rest of the way without talking, which was all right. It had always been all right with us. I told you I posted for a wife the way I'd post for a cook, or a steady hand, practical, no flourish. I believed that when I did it. I believed I was a man who had used up his capacity for anything more than practical, that Margaret's death, and 8 years alone, had turned that part of me to stone. What I know now is that stone is not the same as gone. It just needs the right thing to find the crack. Nora Cal found the crack in my books first, and then, almost without either of us noticing, she found the crack in everything else. That fall the ranch ran 1,600 head. By the following fall, with the books clean and Earl Voss running the operation straight, it was closer to 2,000. We didn't get rich, but we got solid, which is worth more out here, worth more and harder to build. And in the evenings, when the work was done and the house was quiet, she sat at the table across from me with the accounts or a book, and I sat with whatever needed doing, and the lamp burned between us, and outside the Wyoming wind moved across the range, the way it always had, cold and indifferent and enormous. Inside it was warm. That's what I wanted to tell you. It started as a posting on a board and a half-page letter, and a woman who looked east on a depot platform like she was taking a measurement of a life she hadn't lived yet. It turned into the truest thing I'd built since the walls of this house. She knew it before I did. That's all right. In my experience, the people who size things up quickly are usually right, and the smart thing to do is to stop arguing and listen. I learned that from her. I'm still learning.